Open up, please! Small fists hammered against the door with desperate urgency. Jacob Carpenter froze, his hand halfway to the glass of whiskey sitting on the coffee table. They're hurting my mama. She's dying. Somebody help! The voice cracked with terror, a child's voice, high and frantic. Through the people, he saw her, a little girl, no more than 7, soaked from the rain, tangled hair plastered to her tear-streaked face. In her trembling arms, she clutched a baby, no older than 2, whose soft whimper carried through the door. Jacob's chest tightened. No one ever knocked on his door. No one even knew he lived here in this forgotten corner of Cleveland. He had made sure of that. I tried all the other doors. Nobody answered. Please, mister. His hand moved to the lock before his mind could catch up. The chain rattled. The deadbolt clicked. The door swung open. Little did Jacob know, opening that door would pull him into a fight for a family he never knew he needed, and a love he thought he'd lost forever. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The girl stumbled forward, nearly collapsing. Thank you, thank you. They're hurting my mama right now. The bad men. They said they're going to take us, and... Her words dissolved into sobs. Okay. Jacob's voice came out rough, unused. You're safe now. What's your name? Cameron. This is my sister Lily. Please, you have to help our mama. They're beating her. She told us to run, and I knocked on so many doors, but nobody... Where is she? 2 blocks that way. The red building, apartment 2C. Please hurry. They said they're going to... Jacob grabbed his phone and keys. Lock this door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me. You understand? Cameron nodded, her eyes wide with desperate hope. Jacob ran. His breath came hard as he took the stairs 2 at a time. The red apartment building loomed ahead, its security door hanging open, useless. 2nd floor. The sounds reached him before he saw it. Muffled shouting, a woman's cry of pain. Apartment 2C. The door hung open, splintered at the lock. Inside, a woman lay crumpled on the floor, her face bloodied, one arm bent at an angle that made Jacob's stomach turn. 2 men stood over her, one heavy-set with a shaved head, the other wiry and dangerous-looking. The heavy one had his boot raised, preparing to kick her ribs. That's enough, Jacob's voice cut through the room. Both men turned. Surprise flickered across their faces before hardening into aggression. Who the hell are you? Shaved Head demanded. Jacob kept his phone visible in his hand. Someone who's already called 911. Police are 3 minutes out. You want to be here when they arrive? The wiry one laughed. You think we're scared of cops? This woman owes us money. Her deadbeat husband borrowed $8,500 and ran. Now it's her problem. The police don't care about debt collection, the heavy one added, taking a step toward Jacob. But they might care about some guy breaking into an apartment where he doesn't belong. Jacob stood his ground. I'm sure they'll be very interested in why this woman has a broken arm and a split lip, and why 2 men are standing over her, talking about taking payment another way. The words hung in the air. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Shaved Head's eyes narrowed. This isn't over. She still owes. We'll be back. You come back, you deal with assault charges. Her daughters saw everything. They can identify you. The men exchanged glances. The sirens were getting closer. 2 weeks, Shaved Head said, pointing at the woman on the floor. You got 2 weeks to come up with the money, or we're taking what we're owed, and we know where those little girls go to school. They pushed past Jacob and disappeared down the stairs. Jacob rushed to the woman's side. She was conscious but barely, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Blood ran from a gash above her eyebrow, and her left eye was already swelling shut. Your daughters are safe, he said, kneeling beside her. They're at my apartment. Cameron brought her sister to me. The woman's good eye focused on him. My babies. They're okay, but we need to get you to a hospital. The debt... I don't have $8,500. My husband... Don't worry about that now. We'll figure it out. The police arrived moments later, followed by an ambulance. As the paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher, she grabbed Jacob's hand with surprising strength. Thank you, she gasped. Thank you for helping my girls. I'm Cynthia. Cynthia Larry. I'm Jacob Carpenter, and you don't need to thank me.
The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. Jacob sat with Cameron and Lily, who he'd retrieved from his apartment after calling his elderly neighbor to sit with them briefly. Cameron hadn't let go of her sister since they arrived. "Is Mama gonna die?" Cameron asked in a small voice. "No, sweetheart. The doctors are fixing her up. She's going to be okay." "What about the bad men? What if they come back?" Jacob had been asking himself the same question. 2 weeks, $8,500, threats against children. He thought about the grief counseling session he'd had 3 days ago. His therapist, Dr. Martinez, had challenged him with a question that had been sitting uncomfortably in his mind ever since. When's the last time you did something for someone else, not out of obligation, but because you chose to? He had no answer. Tonight, a little girl had knocked on his door when he'd been sitting in the dark, holding a glass of whiskey, wondering what the point of another day was. 2.5 years since the fire. 2.5 years of going through the motions, of therapy that helped, but never...
Mr. Jacob? Lily's tiny voice pulled him back. Can you read to us? I don't have any books here, sweetie. You can tell us a story about brave people. Jacob looked at these two little girls, scared, exhausted, clinging to each other, and something shifted in his chest. Something that had been frozen for a very long time. "Okay," he said, "let me tell you about the bravest person I know. Her name is Cameron." It was past midnight when the doctor finally emerged. Cynthia had a broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and needed 17 stitches. But she would recover. They let the girls see her briefly. Cameron ran to the bedside, careful not to hurt her mother, but desperate to be close. Lily climbed up carefully, curling against Cynthia's uninjured side. "My brave girls," Cynthia whispered, tears streaming down her battered face. "My brave, brave girls." Jacob stood back, giving them space, but Cynthia looked past her daughters, her eyes finding his. "The police officers said those men threatened to come back in 2 weeks for the money." "We'll figure something out," Jacob said.
"How? I work 2 jobs and I barely make rent. I've got maybe $300 in savings. My husband cleaned out our account when he left 6 months ago." 6 months. Jacob did the math. 6 months of her struggling alone, of debt collectors escalating, of fear growing, and tonight had been the breaking point. "There are resources," Jacob said. "Weeks. I can help with some of it. Buy us time to get the rest figured out." Cynthia's eye widened. "You don't even know me. Why would you—" "Because your daughter knocked on my door, and I answered. That's enough." The next morning, Jacob sat across from Dr. Martinez in her small office, the familiar space suddenly feeling different. "You did what?" His therapist leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "I told her I'd help, with some of the money, enough to keep those men from coming back while she gets legal help." "Jacob, this is a significant financial commitment to a stranger." "I know. And it's putting you in contact with dangerous people." "The police are involved. I gave them descriptions. They're looking for the men." Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. "Tell me what you were feeling last night, before the knock." Jacob looked down at his hands. "The same thing I feel most nights. Like I'm just going through the motions. Like there's no point to any of it." "And after?"
After, he paused, searching for the right words. "After, I felt like I mattered, like my choices meant something, like I could actually help someone instead of just existing." That's important, Jacob. That's real progress. But I need you to be honest with yourself about your motivations. Are you trying to save this woman and her children? Or are you trying to save yourself? The question hit him like a physical blow. Can it be both? It can. But you need to make sure you're not using this situation to avoid dealing with your own grief. Helping others is wonderful, but it can't be a substitute for your own healing work. "I'm not trying to replace them," Jacob said quietly. "Daniel and Sarah, I'm not trying to pretend this woman and her kids are... I know you're not. But I need you to keep checking in with yourself. Make sure you're helping because you can, not because you need to." Jacob nodded slowly. "What if it's both?"
What if helping them is also helping me? Dr. Martinez smiled. Then we work with that. Carefully. And you keep coming to these sessions.
The $2,000 Jacob offered came from his savings, money he'd been setting aside slowly from his construction work. But $2,000 was enough to buy time. He met with Cynthia at the hospital the next day, brought her the cashier's check and the information for a victim's advocate he'd gotten through Dr. Martinez's network. "I can't accept this," Cynthia said, staring at the check. "You can and you will, because your daughters need their mother safe and whole, and because I'm offering it freely. But I'll never be able to pay you back. I'm not asking you to." Cynthia's good eye filled with tears. "Why are you doing this?" Jacob thought about how to answer. About the fire, about the 2.5 years of numbness, about the glass of whiskey he'd been holding when Cameron knocked, about Dr. Martinez's question, "When's the last time you did something for someone else?" "Because I can," he said finally. "Because you need help, and I can give it. That's reason enough."
The victim's advocate was a sharp woman named Teresa who'd seen cases like this 100 times. Within 3 days, she had Cynthia connected with legal aid, a restraining order filed against the loan sharks, and a payment plan negotiated through legal channels. The 2 men were arrested 4 days later on assault charges. Turned out they had warrants in 2 other states. The debt would still need to be paid, but through legitimate means now, $6,500 over 2 years. Manageable. Cynthia was released from the hospital after 5 days. Jacob picked her up, drove her home with Cameron and Lily chattering excitedly in the back seat. "I don't know how to thank you," Cynthia said as they pulled up to her building. "You don't need to thank me. Just focus on healing, on being there for your girls." "Will you—" Cynthia hesitated. "Will you come inside? Just for a bit? Cameron's been asking about you constantly. She says you promised to finish the story you were telling them." "The one about the brave girl named Cameron? That's the one." So he went inside, to the apartment that had been cleaned and repaired by the landlord after the police investigation. He sat on the worn couch with Cameron on one side and Lily on the other, and he finished the story he'd started in the hospital waiting room. And for the first time in 2.5 years, Jacob Carpenter felt something other than numbness.
The weeks that followed settled into an unexpected pattern. Jacob would stop by Cynthia's apartment a few times a week, at first to check on them, to make sure the restraining order was holding, to see if they needed anything. But gradually, the visits became less about checking and more about connection. He'd help Cameron with homework while Cynthia made dinner. He'd read to Lily while Cynthia rested, still healing from her injuries. They'd talk after the girls went to bed, carefully at first, then more openly. Cynthia told him about her husband, about the gambling that had started small and spiraled into destruction, about the loans from increasingly dangerous people, about the night he'd packed a bag and disappeared, leaving her with 2 young daughters and debt she couldn't possibly pay. "I kept making excuses for him," she said one evening, standing on her small balcony while the girls slept inside, "telling myself he'd get better, that he loved us enough to change. I was so desperate to keep the family together that I ignored all the signs it was already broken." "That's not weakness," Jacob said. "That's hope. Hope is supposed to be a good thing." "It is, but sometimes we have to be brave enough to let go of what we hoped for and deal with what actually is." Cynthia looked at him. "Is that what you're doing? Letting go?" Jacob knew what she was asking. He'd mentioned his wife and son only once, briefly, when Cameron had asked why he lived alone.
"I'm trying," he said. "It's been 2.5 years since the fire, since I lost them. I've been in grief counseling for 8 months, and most days I still feel like I'm just going through the motions. But then your daughter knocked on my door, and—" he trailed off. "And what?" "And I remembered what it feels like to matter, to have a reason to get up in the morning that's more than just a habit." They stood in comfortable silence, the city lights spread out before them. "Thank you," Cynthia said finally, "not just for the money or the help with the legal stuff, but for showing up, for seeing my daughters as people worth protecting, for treating me like I'm worth helping." "You are worth helping," Jacob said. "All 3 of you. Don't ever doubt that." 4 months after that first desperate knock, Cynthia's husband showed up. Jacob was at the apartment, helping Cameron build a science project for school when the pounding started on the door. Aggressive, demanding. "Cynthia, baby, please, I know you're in there. I came back." Cynthia's face went white. Cameron dropped her markers, her hands starting to shake. "Take the girls to their room," Jacob said quietly. "Lock the door. I'll handle this." "Jacob, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Take the girls." Cynthia gathered both daughters and disappeared down the hallway. Jacob waited until he heard the bedroom door click shut before approaching the front door. Through the peephole, he saw a disheveled man in his mid-30s, desperate-looking and agitated. Jacob opened the door, but kept the chain engaged. "You need to leave."
Who the hell are you? Where's my wife? Your wife has a restraining order, and you're violating it right now. Leave before I call the police. I just want to talk to her. I came back to fix things. Those girls are my daughters. Those girls you abandoned 10 months ago? The ones who almost ended up in foster care because you left your family with debt to criminals? You don't get to show up now and play father. You don't know anything about my family. I know your 7-year-old daughter had to knock on strangers' doors begging for help because you weren't there. I know your wife got beaten so badly she needed 17 stitches because of debt you left behind. I know enough. The man's face twisted with anger. Let me in. I need to see Cynthia. No. This is my family. Not anymore. The man started shouting, started pounding on the door again. Jacob pulled out his phone and dialed 911, keeping his voice calm as he gave the address and explained the restraining order violation. The police arrived within 10 minutes. Jacob watched through the peephole as they handcuffed Cynthia's husband and led him away, still shouting protests. Only when the hallway was silent did Jacob knock gently on the bedroom door. They're gone. It's safe. Cynthia emerged, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. He's really gone? Cameron asked from behind her mother. He's really gone, Jacob confirmed. And he's not coming back. Cynthia covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Jacob moved toward her instinctively, and she collapsed against him sobbing. It's over, she gasped. It's finally over. It's over, Jacob agreed, holding her while she cried, while years of fear and struggle and desperate hope finally broke apart into blessed relief. Cameron and Lily emerged from the bedroom and wrapped themselves around their mother, and Jacob found himself at the center of this small, broken, healing family, feeling something he hadn't felt since before the fire. He felt needed, wanted, like he belonged somewhere. The months continued to pass. Cynthia filed for divorce. Her husband didn't contest. He'd already moved on to the next state, the next scheme, the next person he could use. Jacob kept showing up. Not because Cynthia needed rescuing, she was handling her own life with increasing strength and confidence, but because he wanted to be there, because somewhere along the way, these Friday dinners and Sunday park visits had become the best part of his week. Dr. Martinez noticed the change in him during their sessions. "You're smiling more," she observed, "talking about the future instead of just the past. I feel like I have a future again, like there's something worth looking forward to." "I feel like I have a future again," Jacob admitted, "like there's something worth looking forward to." "That's significant progress, Jacob, but I need to ask, how much of this is about Cynthia and the girls, and how much of it is about you doing your own healing work?" "Both," Jacob said. "I'm still going to therapy. I'm still working through the grief, but they've given me a reason to keep doing that work, a reason to want to be better." "And how do you feel about Cynthia, romantically?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "I think I'm falling in love with her. Maybe I already have. But I don't know if it's too soon, or if she'd even want that, or if I'm just grateful. Love and gratitude can exist together, but you need to make sure you're ready for a relationship, that you're choosing to move forward, not running from the past." "I'm not running. For the first time in 2.5 years, I'm actually standing still.
actually living in the present instead of drowning in the past. That's because of them, yes, but it's also because of the work I've been doing. Both can be true. It was Cameron who forced the issue, as she often did with her characteristic directness. They were at the park, all four of them, watching Lily play on the swings. 15 months had passed since that first desperate knock on Jacob's door.
Cameron was working on a drawing, her tongue poking out in concentration, when she suddenly looked up at Jacob. "Do you love my mom?" Jacob nearly choked on his coffee. Cynthia, sitting beside him, froze. "Cameron," Cynthia's voice was half mortified, half amused, "you can't just ask people things like that." "Why not? You told me honesty is important." Cameron looked genuinely confused. "And I see how you look at each other, like in the movies." Jacob and Cynthia stared at each other, both caught completely off guard. "Sweetheart, Mr. Jacob and I are friends," Cynthia started. "I do," Jacob interrupted quietly. Both Cynthia and Cameron turned to look at him. "I do love your mom," Jacob continued, his eyes never leaving Cynthia's. "I have for a while now. I just didn't know if it was the right time to say it." "Why not?" Cameron asked. "If you love someone, you should tell them." "It's more complicated than that, baby," Cynthia said, but her voice was shaking. "Is it?" Jacob asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels pretty simple. I love you, Cynthia. I love your daughters. You've brought me back to life. You've given me a reason to keep going when I'd forgotten what that felt like. And if there's a chance, any chance that you might feel the same way?" "I do," Cynthia whispered. "I've been terrified to say it because I thought maybe you were just being kind, that you felt obligated."
I never felt obligated. Never once. Jacob reached for her hand, and their fingers intertwined. You and these girls, you're the reason I want to wake up in the morning, the reason I keep going to therapy, keep doing the work, keep choosing to heal instead of giving up. I love you, and I'd like to see where this goes. If you'll let me. "Yes," Cynthia said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I want that too." Cameron beamed. "So does this mean you're going to be our family? Like, official?" "One step at a time," Jacob laughed, but he was looking at Cynthia with such tenderness that the answer was already clear. "But eventually," Cameron pressed. "Eventually," Jacob agreed, "if your mom will have me." "She will, and so will we. Right, Lily?" Lily had come running over when she heard the commotion. "Right what?" "Mr. Jacob is going to be part of our family." "Like a daddy?" "If that's okay with you," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion.
Lily didn't hesitate. She threw herself at Jacob with the complete trust of a child who'd never known him to be anything but safe. "Yes, I always wanted a daddy who doesn't leave." Jacob held her close, and then Cameron joined the hug, and then Cynthia. And they all sat there in the park surrounded by the sounds of children playing and birds singing and life continuing on. This little unit of broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to heal together. "Thank you," Cynthia whispered against Jacob's shoulder, "for opening your door that night, for choosing us." "Thank you," Jacob replied, "for knocking, for being brave enough to keep trying when everyone else turned away, for saving my life by letting me save yours. We saved each other," Cynthia said. And in that moment, under the afternoon sun with two little girls wrapped around them, Jacob Carpenter knew with absolute certainty that it was true. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a desperate 7-year-old girl pounding on your door at night, asking for help when you thought you had nothing left to give.
The confession in the park marked a turning point, but Jacob and Cynthia both knew they needed to take things slowly. They'd both been broken before. They'd both made mistakes rushing into commitments that weren't ready to hold weight. So they dated, properly dated. Jacob took Cynthia to dinner at small restaurants where they talked for hours. They went to movies and held hands in the dock. They walked through art museums on Sunday afternoons while the girls were with Cynthia's mother. They learned each other, not as crisis survivors or co-parents, but as two people falling in love. Cynthia introduced Jacob to her mother officially,
Not as the man who helped us, but as the man I'm dating. The older woman was skeptical at first, protective of her daughter after everything she'd been through. But she softened when she saw how Jacob looked at Cynthia, how he listened when she spoke, how he made her laugh. "You're nothing like that waste of space she married before," Cynthia's mother said bluntly one Sunday dinner. "You actually show up."
I do, Jacob agreed simply, and I always will. They continued their individual therapy throughout. Dr. Martinez watched Jacob's progress with quiet satisfaction. "You're different," she observed during one session. "More grounded, present." "I feel present. For the first time since the fire, I'm not just surviving, I'm actually living." "That's significant growth, Jacob. How are you managing the grief?" "It's still there," he admitted. "I still think about them, about Daniel and Sarah, but it doesn't consume me anymore. I can remember them with love instead of just pain. I can honor their memory by building something new, something good." Cynthia was doing her own work too, processing the trauma of her marriage, the attack, the years of struggling alone, learning to trust again, learning that asking for help wasn't weakness. Together, they were building something real, something lasting. 2 years after that first desperate knock on Jacob's door, he knew he was ready. He planned it carefully, took Cameron and Lily into his confidence. They were part of this family too, and they deserved to be part of this moment. "I want to ask your mom to marry me," he told them one afternoon when Cynthia was at work, "but I need to know if that's okay with you both first." "Yes," Lily shouted immediately, throwing her arms around him. Cameron was more thoughtful. "Are you going to stay? Forever? Even when things get hard?" Jacob knelt down to her level. "Even when things get hard. Especially when things get hard. That's what family means. You don't leave." Cameron studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, then yes, you can marry Mama." They planned it together, the three of them. Back to the park where Cameron had first asked him if he loved her mother, where this had all truly begun.
It was a Saturday afternoon, warm and bright. They'd told Cynthia they were going for a regular park visit, nothing special. But Jacob had the ring in his pocket, and both girls knew the plan. When Lily started playing on the swings, giving them the signal, Jacob stood up from the bench. Cameron stood with him. "Cynthia?" Jacob said, his voice suddenly serious. She looked up, confused by his tone. Then she saw him drop to one knee, saw Cameron standing beside him, grinning, saw Lily running back from the swings. "What?" Cynthia started. "Cynthia Larry," Jacob said, pulling out the ring. "2 years ago, your daughter knocked on my door when I'd forgotten what it meant to be alive. You and these incredible girls reminded me that life is worth living, that love doesn't end with loss, that there's always room for more, for new, for beautiful second chances." Both girls moved closer, flanking him. "Will you marry me?" Jacob asked. "Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you and these girls how much you mean to me? Will you be our family, official?" Cameron added. Cynthia was crying, laughing, all at once. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes!" The wedding was small and perfect. A courthouse ceremony with close friends and family, followed by a reception at a local restaurant. Nothing fancy, but filled with warmth and love. Cameron and Lily were flower girls, both taking their roles seriously in matching lavender dresses they'd picked themselves. They walked down the short aisle, scattering petals with careful precision. When Jacob and Cynthia exchanged vows, Jacob turned to include the girls. "Cameron, Lily, I promise to show up every day, to be the father you deserve, to help with homework, even the math problems I don't understand, to read you bedtime stories, to protect you, support you, and remind you every single day how extraordinary you are." Cynthia's vows were equally moving. "You saw me at my lowest, my most broken, and you chose to help anyway. You gave me back my life, my safety, my ability to trust. You showed me what real love looks like. Patient, kind, showing up even when it's hard.
I promise to spend every day honoring the gift you've given us. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. 1 year after the wedding, Cynthia had news. They were on the balcony of their new home, a bigger place in a better neighborhood with a yard for the girls. Evening had settled over the city, lights twinkling below. Cameron and Lily were finally asleep after several attempts to stay up longer.
Cynthia stood beside Jacob, her hand resting on her stomach. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. Jacob's breath caught. "Are you pregnant?" She smiled through sudden tears. "I took 3 tests this morning, all positive, about 6 weeks along." Jacob pulled her close, overwhelmed by emotion, joy, fear, hope, and a bittersweet ache for the son he'd lost years ago. "How do you feel about it?" Cynthia asked quietly. "I know this might bring up difficult memories." "It does," Jacob admitted, "but not in a bad way. I'll always love Daniel. I'll always miss him and Sarah, but I'm not betraying their memory by being happy now, by having another child to love. I'm honoring them by choosing to live fully." Cameron and Lily were thrilled when they shared the news. Cameron immediately appointed herself chief big sister and started making plans. Lily was excited about having someone smaller than her around. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. At the 20-week ultrasound, they learned a boy. Jacob felt it all. Grief for the son he'd lost, joy for the son he was gaining, gratitude that he'd lived long enough to experience this again. "We're having a son," he whispered to Cynthia, his voice breaking.
They named him Harrison Jacob Carpenter. When he arrived on a warm September evening, small and red and screaming with healthy lungs, the nurse placed him in Jacob's arms. The last fragment of the broken man he'd been dissolved completely. "Hi, buddy," Jacob whispered to his son, tears streaming down his face. "Welcome to the family. We've been waiting for you." 6 months later, they were all together on the balcony again. Cameron was 9 now, sketching the city skyline. Lily, now 6, was curled against her mother's side, fighting sleep. Harrison sat in Jacob's lap, babbling and reaching for the stars. "I was thinking about that night," Jacob said quietly, "the night Cameron knocked on my door." "I think about it all the time," Cynthia replied. "How close we came to losing everything. How different things could have been." I had the glass of whiskey in my hand. I was sitting in the dark, wondering what the point was. Couldn't see any reason to keep going. And I had already given up. I thought they were going to take me or kill me. Either way, I'd lose my girls. But Cameron knocked. And you opened the door. They sat in comfortable silence, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here, from that desperate night to this moment of perfect peace.
"Sometimes I wonder what made you answer," Cynthia said. "Of all the doors Cameron knocked on, somehow she found you, the one person who would help." "We saved each other," Jacob said gently. "I was dying slowly in that apartment. You and the girls reminded me how to live, gave me a reason. And you gave us hope, safety, love." Cynthia kissed his cheek. "You gave us everything." Cameron looked up from her drawing. "Are you guys being mushy again?" "Extremely mushy," Jacob confirmed with a grin. "Gross, but also thanks, Dad, for answering the door, for being our family. Thank you for knocking, for being brave enough to keep trying until someone answered." The city stretched out before them, full of lights and lives and stories they'd never know. But their story, this story, had found its happy ending. Not because one person rescued the other, but because they both chose, actively, daily, deliberately, to show up, to be present, to heal together while giving each other reasons to keep going. All because a little girl was brave enough to keep knocking, and a broken man was brave enough to answer.
If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that hope is real and second chances are possible, please don't just watch and walk away. Hit that subscribe button and join our Soul Lives Stories family. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply show up for others and for ourselves. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time someone showed up for you when you needed it most.